All right, so I have the dyno set up in autoplot. Go ahead and get the car started. Let the wideband come up. Some small iffiness around idle because I changed the cells. Not too bad. Okay, let's go ahead and do our pull. Now I'm going to be keeping an eye on the air-fuel ratio, and if at any time we start to get leaner than about 13.6, 13.7, I'm going to abort the pull. All right, here we go. Looks like we already beat, we already knocked out the numbers to beat. Not too bad at all. Let's take a look and see what our air-fuel ratio table is doing. Now, previously, this tune was set up for mass airflow, and that's the reason why I have this big block of 13.3 in here. And we can see that we need to add fuel down here between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM. And that's probably why power is down a little bit before 4,300 RPM, is because we were lean. I was about 14 air-fuel ratio, and the engine's just not going to like that under a full throttle condition. Luckily, this engine is really forgiving, so we're not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to add 4% fuel to that area. Blend up. Blend up. Blend down a bit. And let's do that again. All right, so another pull basically matches the first pull we did. Not surprising. We didn't really make that many changes at all. It's the same amount of ignition timing. It's the same air-fuel ratio targets. The only thing I'm wanting to do is I want to get rid of that, that lean condition as we first start getting into it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add a little bit more fuel through here. We'll do one more pull. All right. Now, we still appear to be a little bit lean through this region, but we pass through it so quickly that it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on. So I'm going to get rid of the last two pulls. And let's go ahead and change our start RPM so we can see what kind of power this thing is making a little bit lower down. Okay, so our sweep rate is 600. The important thing here is that when I change the start RPM, the sweep rate has to stay the same. If I change the sweep rate, I could affect the power readout that the dyno is going to give me, and if we do that, then we're getting garbage data and it doesn't mean anything. Let's go ahead and start this pull at let's start it low. Let's start it at 1700. Okay, our sweep rate stayed the same. We're going to accept. Let's do this again. All right, now we can really see what torque is doing at that lower RPM value. So we can see, for whatever reason, right at 3000 RPM, we almost have like a little bit of a hole. So what I'd like to do is figure out, why is that happening? Is it because it's lean? Is it because it's rich? Okay, let's do one more pull to verify what's going on at 3000 RPM. Pull this over to the right a bit. Okay, so we can see we basically made exactly what we did on the last run. That means that, we're getting good data. And I was data logging, so let's go ahead and stop that data log. And let's take a quick look at what happened. Pause that. Okay, we can see our RPM is here in green. In white we have AFR, and in yellow we have spark advance. And if we back up to 3000 RPM, right here at 3000 we can see we actually go rich. Now I can tell you from experience, this car doesn't like to be rich. We make best power at about 13.3 air-fuel ratio on this particular vehicle, which is the reason why I'm targeting 13.3 in the AFR table. So what I need to do is, right there around 3000 RPM, is I need to take some fuel out of it. So right here, between these two values, and am I rich at 2800? Okay, at 2800 I start to get fat. At 3200, I'm about 13. So really, I may need to put a column back in at 3000 RPM so I can remove some fuel there. So I think we're going to sacrifice this 1600 RPM column. And really, I want to see if I can see what's going on right there. 4800, interpolate. Okay. Let's make sure that took. Over here and analyze live. It in fact did. We can see we're cut up again there. And right here at 3000, I'm going to roughly take out 3% fuel. Let's do another pull. I'm going to get rid of this last pull so we don't fill up our auto plots. Okay. Let's see what happens. All right, we still have a dip there at 3000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my minimum fuel load here to 75. Change this to normal so it can affect changes to the tune much faster. And right there at 3000 RPM, I think I'm going to go into my ignition table and we'll take a look, see what's going on. I'm going to take a look right here. I can see that we've got a decent amount of ignition timing in it that climbs normally. I'm going to bump right here at 3000 RPM up, and I'm going to make it match 3500. So I'm going to add 0.7. And now let's see what happens on this next pull. Okay, so we can see I've added timing right there at 3000 RPM, and we made no extra power at all. So, question is, do we have too much timing in it? Let's try going the other direction. Instead of adding, let's reduce timing so it matches our 2700 RPM column. Let's just see what happens. I'm going to stop auto tune because really we're getting some really good air fuel ratio values, and I don't think we really need to adjust those anymore. We'll just let ego correction take care of the rest. We will simply use this so we can see a histogram of what's going on. There we go. All right. Last pull on this auto plot. If we don't make any gains, what I'll do is I'll just erase those auto plots. Okay, so looking at our data, looks like we may have actually lost power there. Right there, right at 3,000. So what does that tell me? That tells me that I'm already making all the peak torque that I can at that RPM point. And what I'm seeing is probably has something to do with either the cam or the intake manifold design. It might be some kind of reflected wave harmonic going on in the intake manifold or the cam design at that point. It could be something in the exhaust. However, if we look at the purple dotted line, what we can see is that it almost just looks like the loss at 3,300 moved downward 300 RPM. So it does match what we did on mass air. There's always seems to be a dip there. It's probably, it has something to do with airflow into and out of the engine. So rather than continue to fight with that, since I'm going to be in that RPM range for a very, very short period of time, I'm just going to leave it be. We've attempted to add timing, reduce timing, move air-fuel ratio. Sometimes we just have to accept that it is what it is. All right, the last thing to do, well, I mean, we already got victory. We beat what we had previously on the mass airflow tune, is I'm going to add a little bit of timing above 5,500 RPM and see if I can't flatten that out just a little bit more. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to reset these last few auto plots. I'm also going to get rid of the magenta auto plot. And now what we're going to do is add just a little bit of timing up here above 5,500. Now you'll notice that it's already pretty aggressive. This engine really likes ignition timing above 5,500 RPM. It's pretty safe to start really getting into ignition timing above peak torque. Don't get carried away. If you got a small block Ford, 4.6 motor, they like a climbing ignition curve, but if you get carried away, you will run into detonation. This engine is not really detonation prone, as far as I can tell, because I have actually pretty much abused this motor with ignition timing. And I'm able to move it over MBT, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. All right, guys, so we just talked about finding MBT and how this engine is relatively safe to find MBT on. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attempt to find a little bit more power above 5,500. And then we're going to purposefully over advance the timing, and we'll see what happens to torque output when we cross that MBT line. It's very dangerous to do on most engines. This engine is pretty forgiving. However, if something goes wrong, we'll be doing the S50 swap sooner rather than later. All right. So right here at 6,000 RPM, I am going to add 2 more degrees of timing. And what we should see is an increase in torque from 5,500 to 6,000. Okay. Now, we did not get an increase in torque. What does that mean? That means that I have already found the maximum amount of ignition advance at that RPM point for this motor. As a matter of fact, what we should test and see is if I remove some timing, do we increase power? Because you can actually be right over the edge of MBT and actually start losing torque. So I'm going to pull 1 degree from where we were, and I'm sorry, 1 degree from where we were previously on the orange pull, and we'll see if we gain any power at 6,000 RPM. All right, now that's our blue line, and really you can see we actually picked up a little bit of power between 6,000 and 6,500, but we're down on power between 55 and 6. I don't really care about little gains up by 6,500. I'm shifting before that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this back at 33 degrees of ignition timing at 6,000 RPM, and we're going to call that good. I apologize, 34 degrees. And now, what we're going to do is something very scary. I'm going to grab this whole thing, and I'm going to add too much timing to it. And let's hope something doesn't go wrong. Now, what we should see is a loss in torque output from this because we are past MBT. Duck your head a little lower than that door. Okay, this is a prime example, okay? Scary, I know, right? Notice how the engine tone actually changed because we were over advanced. You know what? Let's get out of the vehicle and let's walk over there and let's actually take a look at this. We'll talk about it. Okay guys, so we just got done doing the final pull, the scary pull, where I purposely went way past peak timing because we've worked on this tune and we found peak torque and the ignition timing that made the most power. And let's take a look at this last pull. Now this last pull is going to be this gray graph, and let me get some of these other ones out of the way. I'm only going to leave the orange pull and the orange, red, and gray so we can see what's actually going on. So that one. Okay, now red was the pull that I did on mass air, and that was actually optimized, okay? Now orange was best power for the day today on the speed density tune, and we can see that it was making really, really good power. The gray is me purposefully adding 3 degrees everywhere to the ignition table at wide open throttle to push the tune past MBT. And what we can see here is that I'm going to take this yellow cursor and I'm going to move it to our orange. It's most noticeable in torque instead of horsepower. But what we have here is we can see losses. Now, it does not look like a big deal here on horsepower, but over here on torque, that's 3 foot-pounds of torque loss. And basically what's happened is as we increase ignition timing, our cylinder pressure is moving. You could actually hear the engine tone completely change on that final pull. And I bet if I push the ignition timing a little bit more, this thing will start spitting parts out the bottom of it. This is what happens when you cross MBT. You gain power, gain power, gain power, and then you start to have a power loss. Now, if I took, and this engine makes best power at 13.3 air-fuel ratio, if I took it and richened maybe to, somewhere around 12.5 or 12.8, we might actually gain power back. Like on an LS likes to be a little fat in the top end, and that lets you add more timing up there to make more power. But this is a dangerous scenario. If you're ever on the dyno and you're adding timing and you start to have power drop off, you need to really take a look at what's air-fuel ratio doing, and are you getting into knock and detonation. Luckily, I have a swap waiting for this motor to go, so I wasn't too concerned with it. But I do want to make the track event at the end of the month, so I'm glad it didn't let go today. All right, guys, thanks for joining me today. We basically did an entire tune on the E30 today. And let me know what you want to see, and we'll try to get that on film. Till next time.